The sound that defined Eleanor Vance's life was the sharp, percussive click of her stiletto heels on the marble floors of the Vance Textiles, building a sound that meant command, precision, and the relentless march of time. But today, that click echoed in the hollow, cavernous stainless steel kitchen of the Gaillard Center. And it sounded like a countdown to oblivion. What do you mean? The entire shipment is compromised. Eleanor's voice was not a shout. It was a blade of ice. She stood, a 58-year-old widow carved from granite and chenille, staring at a pallet of rotting shrimp. The smell of ammonia and failure stung her nostrils. Sarah, her young, terrified assistant, held a phone, her face pale. The trucking company. They said the refrigeration unit failed. All of it, Mrs. Vance. The lobsters, the fillets, the caviar, it's all gone. And Chef Antoine is not answering his phone. Eleanor finished, her jaw tightening. She knew this was no accident. This was an execution. Tonight was the Vance Textiles 100th Anniversary Gala. It was also, less publicly, the auction block for her family's legacy. Her late husband, Richard, a man of soaring charisma and catastrophic business sense, had left her with a mountain of hidden debt. The gala was her last desperate gamble to woo investors, to prove that the company and she was still vital. And her rival, Marcus Thorne, knew it. Marcus, a man who had been circling her company like a jackal for years, hadn't just poached her celebrity chef. He had, with horrifying precision, cut her supply lines. He didn't just want her to fail. He wanted to publicly humiliate her, to make her the laughingstock of Charleston society. Get me a list. Eleanor snapped, her mind a cold machine. Every 5-star, 4-star, and 3-star chef in this city. I don't care what it costs. Get me a replacement. For an hour, the marble kitchen echoed with frantic calls. Every answer was a door slammed shut. Booked. Impossible. My condolences. At 5:02 p.m., with guests arriving in less than 2 hours, Sarah approached, her hands trembling as she held her iPad. Mrs. Vance. There's one possibility. It's a very small place. A diner, really. Out on the old highway. Arthur's Grub. He's the only one who answered the phone. Eleanor felt the word like a physical blow. Grub. A 4-letter word that encapsulated her complete and utter ruin. She would be serving grub at her black tie centennial. Does he have a kitchen? She whispered, the fight draining from her. He says he's closing it down. For good. He said he has a van. Sarah winced. And he can be here in 20 minutes. He needs $5,000. In cash. Up front. It was the last of her liquid cash. The money she'd earmarked for payroll. It was, in every sense, her last chip. Do it, Eleanor said, the word tasting like ash. Get me the man who serves grub. But the man who walked in 20 minutes later was not what she expected. She had braced for a slovenly man in a stained apron. The man who entered was 62, tall, and carried himself with the stillness of a deep, calm water lake. His silver hair was neatly combed, his work pants were creased, and his simple blue shirt was immaculate. He carried a battered wooden box that looked like an antique doctor's bag. But his eyes, they were the eyes of a man who had seen the end of the world and had, somehow, kept standing. They were gray, kind, and utterly, profoundly exhausted. He was not, however, what he seemed, and Eleanor, in her panicked state, had missed the name on the iPad. Mrs. Vance, he said. His voice was a low baritone, rough with disuse. Mr. Arthur. Arthur Benoit, he said. The name struck Eleanor with the force of a physical impact. She grabbed the steel counter to steady herself. Arthur. Benoit. No. It couldn't be. Not him. Not now, you, she stammered, her mask of command shattering. You're Arthur Benoit? The Golden Ladle. Arthur's tired eyes flickered with a pain so old it was almost part of him. I haven't been called that in 25 years, ma'am. But Arthur's Grub. People forget, he said simply. Or they remember, and they prefer to forget. He looked around the empty, gleaming kitchen. Your assistant said you had an emergency. Eleanor couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a random, down-on-his-luck chef. This was the widower of her best friend. This was the fourth twist. The one that bound them together. 25 years ago, before she was Eleanor Vance, CEO, she was Ellie. And her best friend in the world, her college roommate, was Isabella Benoit. Isabella was fire and light and laughter. And she was married to a culinary genius, Arthur, the Golden Ladle of Charleston. His restaurant, Isabella's, was a legend, and then it burned. A horrific fire that took the restaurant and Isabella's life. The whispers started immediately. Arson. Insurance money. Arthur Benoit, the primary suspect, was ruined. He was never charged lack of evidence, but in Charleston society, a lack of evidence is not the same as innocence. He became a pariah. And Eleanor, terrified of the scandal, terrified of the whispers, and grieving in her own selfish, frightened way, she had abandoned him. She didn't go to the funeral. She didn't return his one broken-voiced call. She had chosen her new life with Richard Vance over the man who had lost everything. And now, he was standing in her kitchen, her only hope, holding his own foreclosure notice, which had slipped from his wallet. He didn't see her notice it. He just saw a rich woman on the verge of a breakdown. The irony was so bitter, it choked her. An emergency. Eleanor finally said, her voice a hollow echo. Yes, Mr. Benoit. I have. An emergency. Call me Arthur. Please. Arthur. She repeated. The name felt like broken glass in her mouth. The chef I hired has vanished. My entire food delivery, lobsters, fillets, everything was sabotaged. It's all ruined. Arthur Benoit, the man who knew more about ruined than anyone in this room, simply nodded. He didn't look at her. He walked, with a slow, deliberate pace, past the gleaming, unused ovens, past the copper pots hanging like museum pieces. He went to the pantry. He was in there for 10 minutes. Eleanor found herself, inexplicably, holding her breath. He emerged, wiping his hands on a clean towel. Well, she demanded. The old, imperious Eleanor grasping for control. Your saboteur, Arthur said quietly, was a man of expensive tastes. But he was not a chef. What does that mean? He took the show, the proteins, the caviar, the truffle oil, the price tags. He left. The soul. He pointed to the deep recesses of the pantry. You have 50-pound sacks of Carolina gold rice. You have stone-ground grits from Anson Mills. You have bags of heirloom flour, blocks of yeast, gallons of heavy cream, bushels of winter root vegetables, 2 whole cured hams, and, in the back, a case of very fine, very old sherry. He turned to face her, and for the first time, his gray eyes met hers. The accusation of 25 years of silence hung between them. I cannot make your menu, Mrs. Vance, he said. The Mrs. Vance, a deliberate, formal wall. It is impossible. Eleanor's legs felt weak. So, you're quitting? Like everyone else? No. A spark ignited in those exhausted eyes. A spark she hadn't seen since he'd cooked for her and Isabella in their tiny apartment, all those years ago. I am telling you that I will make my menu. I will give them the soul of Charleston. It will not be what they expect, but it will be. Food, but salt pork, grits. Eleanor protested, the snob in her rising, desperate. At a gala? Marcus Thorne will. They'll laugh me out of the room. Then let them laugh, Arthur said. He picked up his battered wooden box and set it on the steel counter. He opened it. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a set of worn, beautiful carbon steel knives. "I am not here to save you from laughter, Mrs. Vance. I am here because you are paying me $5,000. It is, I believe, the same amount of money my wife's life insurance policy was worth." The verbal slap was so sharp, Eleanor flinched. He knew she knew. She looked at the rotting shrimp. She looked at the ghost of her dead best friend, standing before her in a clean shirt, holding his knives. "Fine," she whispered. "Cook. Just cook." "One more thing," Arthur said, his back to her as he began to light the massive gas ranges. "What?" "Stay out of my kitchen." At 7 p.m., the guests began to glitter. The ballroom was a sea of black silk, diamonds, and the quiet, predatory hum of old money. Eleanor Vance stood at the entrance, her spine a rod of iron, her smile a masterpiece of social warfare. "Eleanor, darling, you look breathtaking. Truly." Holding it all together, Marcus Thorne. He didn't just walk. He slithered. A man poured into a tuxedo, his smile oily, his eyes cold and reptilian. "Marcus, how predictable of you to come." Eleanor greeted him, offering a cheek for him to kiss the air beside. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." He boomed, a false, booming sound. "I do hope everything is perfect tonight," I heard. Such a tragedy. About poor Antoine? A sudden illness, I'm sure. Chef Antoine is dreadfully ill. Eleanor lied smoothly, her eyes locking with his. "But I have found the most extraordinary replacement. A true artist. A legend, really. You're in for a surprise, Marcus." "Oh, Eleanor," he smirked, patting her hand. "I'm sure I am." He glided away, a shark scenting blood. At 7:45 p.m., the guests were seated. The lights dimmed. Eleanor sat at the head table, her stomach a fist of ice. She had not been back to the kitchen. She had no idea what was coming. She was serving grits to the people she needed to save her. It was a cosmic joke. The first course emerged. The entire room, 300 of Charleston's elite, fell silent. The waiters placed the bowls. It was soup, not a delicate, clear consommé. It was an opaque, velvety, amber-colored liquid. In the center, there was no lobster medallion. There was a single, perfectly fried, grit and cornmeal fritter. Eleanor closed her eyes. She was ruined. Marcus Thorne, across the room, let out a short, sharp bark of laughter. He picked up his spoon, ready to mock. But then, a new sound. Spoons striking china. And then, silence. A deep, profound, reverent silence. At the table next to Marcus sat Genevieve Stern. Genevieve was 65, the semi-retired, legendary food critic for The New Yorker. She was the executioner of Culinary Worlds. She had come tonight only as a favor to a board member. She lifted her spoon. She sipped. She did not, as Eleanor had feared, spit it out. She froze. Her eyes, behind her fashionable glasses, widened. She looked at the soup. She tasted it again. This time with a deep, forensic, almost painful concentration. A small, involuntary sound. Half gasp, half sob, escaped her throat. She put down her spoon. She was staring at the kitchen doors. The main course arrived. No fillet. No duck. Instead, it was a piece of salt-cured pork belly, braised for hours until it was as tender as a memory. With a skin so crisp it shattered, it sat on a bed of the creamiest, whitest rice grits, tasting faintly of sherry and wild mushrooms. Beside it, root vegetables caramelized to the color of mahogany. The room was now electric. People weren't just eating. They were talking. They were whispering. My God, the flavor. It tastes like my grandmother's house. Marcus Thorne was no longer laughing. He was staring. Confused. At his empty plate, Genevieve Stern was no longer eating. She was visibly trembling. When the dessert, a humble sweet potato bread pudding, but one elevated to celestial heights with a burnt sugar and bourbon sauce, was served, she stood up. This was not in the program. The entire ballroom fell silent. Genevieve Stern. The legend walked away from her table. She did not go to the podium. She did not go to Eleanor. She walked, with a terrible, beautiful purpose, straight toward the double-swinging doors of the kitchen. "Ma'am, please." A waiter tried to stop her. She pushed past him, shoving through the doors with a thwack. The entire room stared at the closed doors. "Well," Marcus slurred, drunk on champagne and a victory that was rapidly souring. "This is entertainment." The doors burst open again. Genevieve Stern was dragging Arthur by the hand. He was in his shirt sleeves, his face slick with sweat, a borrowed apron around his waist. He was trying to pull away, his eyes wide with a panic. Eleanor recognized the panic of a man who had spent 25 years trying to be invisible. "What? What is this?" A board member sputtered. Genevieve ignored him. She stood in the center of the room, her voice shaking with an emotion that was part fury, part joy. "I know this meal," she announced, her voice cracking. "Ladies and gentlemen, you think you are eating a very good rustic meal. You are not." She turned to the crowd, and her eyes were wet with tears. 25 years ago," she said, her voice ringing with vindication, "I was a young, ambitious critic. I came to Charleston to review a restaurant that was... It was a poem. It was called Isabella's. It was run by a genius, a man they called the Golden Ladle. His name was Arthur Benoit." A collective gasp went through the room. The older Charlestonians remembered. The blood drained from Eleanor's face. "I ate there on a Tuesday," Genevieve continued, her voice raw. "I had this exact meal, the fireside consommé, the ashes of roast pork. This pudding. It was the last review I ever wrote of him." She turned to Arthur, her face a mask of awe and old sorrow. "Because on Wednesday, Isabella's burned to the ground." She faced the crowd again. "His wife, Isabella." The whispers said he said it for the insurance. He was ruined. He vanished. Until tonight. She let go of his hand. "Who?" she demanded, her voice a lion's roar. "Who found this man and had the audacity, the gall, to make him cook in the shadows?" Before Eleanor could speak, Marcus Thorne was on his feet, his face purple. He was drunk, and he was cornered. "This is a farce," he shouted. "This is obscene. You're applauding a man who burned down his own life, a man who killed his wife for the insurance money." It was the unspoken, spoken, the final taboo. The room was tomb silent. Arthur, who had been frozen, finally looked up. His exhausted, kind eyes were now blazing. They were not blazing with anger. They were blazing with a terrible, cold clarity. "I never filed for the insurance, Marcus," Arthur said, his quiet voice carrying across the ballroom. "You know that." "Of course you didn't," Marcus spat, advancing on him, jabbing a finger. "Because everyone knew that place was a tinderbox. I told Richard Vance himself," he sneered, gesturing to Eleanor, "that the wiring in that back office was a disgrace. The smell of jasmine from his wife's perfume, mixed with old grease, I told him." The ballroom was so quiet, Eleanor could hear the ice melting in her glass. She was looking at Marcus, but she was also remembering Isabella, her office, the scent she always wore. L'air du temps? No. It was jasmine. Arthur had gone pale. His whole body was shaking. He took a step toward Marcus, a man walking out of a 25-year fog. "Jasmine," Arthur whispered. "What?" Marcus snapped, realizing he'd said too much. "Jasmine," Arthur repeated, his voice breaking. That was Isabella's office. It was her private room. It was nowhere near the kitchens. It was nowhere near. The wiring was new. Arthur looked up, tears streaming down his face, his eyes locked on the terrified, blustering face of Marcus Thorne. How did you know what her office smelled like? Marcus Thorne froze. His face, a mask of arrogant confidence, collapsed. He had just, in front of 300 people, placed himself in Isabella's private office, at the heart of the fire, at the moment of its birth. He looked from Arthur's broken, avenging face to Eleanor's stunned one. He stammered. You're twisting my words. It was a long time ago. Everyone knew. No, Marcus, Eleanor said. Her voice was pure ice. She was no longer the frightened widow. She was the CEO. She was the daughter of a 100-year legacy. She was the best friend of a murdered woman, and she was holding her clutch purse, from which a small, steady red recording light was blinking. I don't think they did, she said, her voice ringing with cold fury. But they do now, every single one of them. And so do the police, who are waiting in the lobby for your comments on tonight's other little act of sabotage. The aftermath was a storm. Marcus Thorne was arrested, not just for the gala's sabotage, but for the reopening of a 5-year-old arson and murder investigation. The confession, recorded by Eleanor and corroborated by dozens, was airtight. The gala, against all odds, was a triumph. The story, The Return of the Golden Ladle, The Vengeance of Isabella, was on the front page of every paper. The investors didn't just see a company on the brink. They saw a story of resilience, of authenticity, of a legend reborn. They saw Eleanor Vance not as a widow in her husband's shadow, but as a warrior who had avenged her friend and saved her legacy. They didn't just save Vance Textiles. They fought to invest. Late that night, long after the guests and the police and the flashing lights had gone, Eleanor found Arthur in the now quiet kitchen. He was sitting on a stool, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. His knives were packed in their wooden box. Eleanor walked in. The click of her heels was softer now, on the kitchen's rubber mat. She sat on the stool next to him. They sat in silence for a full 5 minutes. I didn't come to her funeral, Eleanor said, her voice small. All the ice melted. I know, Arthur said, his voice thick. I was a coward. I was young, and my new life, it seemed so shiny, and I was so afraid of the scandal. Afraid of you. I know. She loved Jasmine, Eleanor whispered, tears finally breaking free, tracing paths through her expensive makeup. She used to spray it on her pillows. She said it made her dream. Arthur reached out, not as a chef, not as a pariah, but as a fellow mourner, and placed his large, calloused hand over hers. She loved you, Ellie. She was so proud of you, Mrs. Vance. Oh, Arthur, Eleanor sobbed, collapsing into the simple human contact. I am so sorry. Me too, he said. Me too. 1 year later, on the 101st anniversary of Vance Textiles, the city's most anticipated event was not a gala. It was the grand reopening of Isabella's. The new restaurant, funded by a joint venture between a thriving Vance Textiles and Chef Arthur Benoit, was on the same spot where the old one had burned. It was built of new wood and old brick, and in the center, there was a courtyard with a single, magnificent jasmine bush. At the head table, a man and a woman, both in their late 50s and early 60s, raised a glass. They weren't a CEO and a chef. They were just Ellie and Arthur. To Isabella, Arthur said, his eyes clear for the first time in decades. To Isabella, Eleanor replied, her smile, for the first time in decades, reaching her eyes. And in the kitchen, the Golden Ladle was back, not cooking for ghosts, but for the living.
If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to support the channel so we can create more videos. Thank you, everyone.